Ever wonder why some marketing just works? There's a secret sauce for every brand. We can help you find yours. We're IDEA. It's in our name. It's what we do. Find us at theideabrand.com.
The podcast is going well.
Yeah. People listen.
Like this particular
right now, this is going well. I'm enjoying myself.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the editor-in-chief of Voice. I'm joined by journalism virtuoso, assistant editor Andrew Keats.
What's up, my man?
And Sarah Libby, a normal managing editor.
Thanks.
How does this
Seems unfair.
started to result in like an insult at Sarah every time?
No, I think it's yours.
It's meant to embarrass me, but it does seem insulting.
I don't know. It doesn't really come off that way to me.
She's not normal.
Thank you.
We have a great show this week, but one thing before we get going, it's been a rainy couple of days. It's been the clouds. It's been a dark San Diego, but the clouds are parting. Tomorrow, the Ocean Beach Pier is opening. They moved it to, the rumor at our school is they moved it to Fridays so that the kids were out of school so the kids could all go and celebrate the opening of the Ocean Beach Pier after its dreadful 6 month or whatever it is, coma.
I don't think it was even 6 months.
I like that they're having the kids go because that reinforces our point that like it would be an elaborate photo op, and now there's gonna be like children running through the cameras
By design.
Yes.
I'm probably gonna go.
Of course.
Take my kids. And run out on the pier.
All of this checks out.
So you officially win. I was completely wrong about that. I misread it horribly. I had no idea what I was talking about.
The thing, if it makes you feel better, it wasn't so much your lack. I've been thinking about this, and it wasn't so much your lack of like intellectual rigor or naivete. It was just a byproduct of your overwhelming self-absorption. And like that was important to you, and so it was impossible for you to conceive of it being anything other than a tragedy in your life, in the story of which you are the hero.
No, see, I understand the impulse to assume that nothing will happen.
Yes. Sure. Thank you.
But it was also very clear that this specific thing would happen.
Well, we'll have it open. Congratulations to the city. It will be open for Memorial Day and for the summer and for the junior lifeguard jump that I participated in.
That you participated in. Thank you for finishing that sentence.
So good job to the city. Hero of the week. Okay, this is the thing I was actually supposed to talk about. We are just over halfway to our goal for the spring fundraising campaign at Voice of San Diego. We are a nonprofit, so this is how our business works. It's not a great mystery how this operates. People give us money. If you value this show, if you value any of the investigative work we're going to talk about or have talked about or all of this service, the daily reporting we provide, in order to stay independent and keep breaking news and important stories like that coming to San Diego, you have to donate. People have to donate. So if you want Voice of San Diego to stick around and thrive for a long time, please donate. You can do that at voicesandiego.org. When people donate, they can leave a little note. You can do that. We love it. We share it. Bruce Warren, for example, had a great note the other day. He said, I highly respect Scott Lewis and find the news refreshingly honest. Thank you, Bruce. Your check's in the mail.
I'm waiting to see your fake Bruce Warren Gmail account pop up on your phone.
Bonnie Wright, I like what you have to say and how you say it. Thanks. I feel targeted again. Jeff and Sally Toyster, the investigative journalism helps make San Diego a better place. And JD, free press is important. Doesn't come free of cost. These great copy. They write great copy.
Good.
They write great copy. Okay, coming up on the show today, we have a story about teachers texting their students of all the major stories we have done in this series about sexual abuse in schools, sexual misconduct. This one has resonated in a way I haven't seen, and I'd like to talk about why. Andy here has an update about the sports arena and the bidding process happening there, and we'll talk about what local attorney Corey Briggs is up to for 2020, or not up to. Who really knows? We also have Maya Rosas coming in for an interview about the recent frozen bill SB 50, frozen comatose on ice. Maya is the president of YIMBY Democrats. She wrote an open letter in our pages.
Our news website, yeah.
To Sony Atkins.
Yes. Before the show, we accidentally said Sony Tatkins, and we predicted that somebody would accidentally say it on the air.
So
Scott
glad this
just
happened.
has.
Senate President Tony Atkins about the housing bill. Okay, first, this story. This story really resonated. Okay, 2 teachers at Poway's Westview High School were caught sending inappropriate texts to a student. One told a student that he coached on the basketball team, the junior varsity basketball team, that he had a dream about her. And when she asked what it was about, he said, "That's inappropriate. I'll tell you after you graduate." And then when officials asked him why he said that, he said, "I don't know."
Yeah, I text all my students.
And he faced no discipline, nothing. He's not losing his job, nothing.
Yes and no. He did get removed from his coaching position.
But I just heard today he's going back.
Correct. That's also true.
So, and then the previous one had been involved like in some creepier texts as well. So these are just two teachers at one high school.
Yes. So both of them are still in the classroom at Westview. One thing that Kayla pointed out in her story about this case that I thought was interesting is that this was not included in any of the records we got when we asked for records about sexual misconduct. So we've encountered all kinds of ways that schools have kept these records from coming out. You know, some are still delaying, like San Diego Unified, and just haven't gotten them to us yet. Some are fighting in court. So this record, which someone tipped us off to, was actually not categorized as sexual. And so they said, well, that wasn't a sexual misconduct record. That was just regular old misconduct, so we don't have to give that to you. And it was only when we specifically asked for records on this teacher that we got them.
Yeah, and well, that's interesting because it gets at what was so alarming to me about the story, which is that these texts it's like a form of communication that maintains the most, like the barest minimum of plausible deniability.
Right.
Which allows them to, they don't talk about sex in these texts.
Right.
But also it's clear to anyone what is happening in these texts.
Yeah, I mean, he even referred to it himself as an inappropriate dream, I think, and there's not many ways that can go.
And I mean, to come back and say, I'll tell you after you graduate is like it's almost like, well, we need a perfect example of what is meant by grooming.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, this is how you establish a relationship through the veneer of mentorship,
right,
that can extend beyond the 18th birthday or graduation, and take advantage of them at the young age and yet give yourself an opportunity to be around when it would no longer be ostensibly illegal.
Yeah.
Well, and also didn't he say like right after, also don't tell anybody about these?
Yes, and that's a big hallmark of a lot of these cases we've seen in which students did end up having sexual relationships with their teachers, is like this desire to create this really intimate, like emotional connection where it's kind of like them and the teacher against the world. And so that is certainly like a hallmark of that type of behavior.
So I was on the radio this morning on Kogo, and they said, what if he had just said this to the girl? Wouldn't that have been worse? Couldn't he have gotten in more trouble? And I thought of myself, actually, no, because he could have said something like, oh, she misinterpreted it. It's my word against hers, all that sort of thing. And I think what we've come to realize with this is another one where they realized like they could not, under the law and under the teacher's contract, fire him. And so they had no, they had nothing they could do. And so I think what's resonating with a lot of people is they're reading this and they're like, well, how is this possible? How can you do that and nothing happen?
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say about the texting is that, like, I know from my time in school, it was just not that easy to have any sort of interactions with your teachers outside of the classroom. They would have had to have been physical. You'd have to be in front of them, and that's suspicious enough that it's not. It takes another leap for it to happen. Texting like this is relatively easy. It's like this new level of accessibility that makes it easier to come by.
Yeah, and when you think about the fact that they already have access to these students for the majority of the day, every day, 5 days a week, 9 months of the year, to think that they're also saying, well, you also need to be available to me after school and on weekends, that's kind of disturbing.
Yeah, so, and they hadn't had a policy on texting. So you can see why texting would be advantageous for, a basketball team or something, like, hey guys, we're going to have a pizza party after the game or whatever, bring $5 or I don't know. But you can see how you might want to be able to text important things to people, but they hadn't had any policies on how to use that. Now they have a policy. So now if you violate it, they can say you violated the policy, but they actually couldn't say that before, right? There was no actual rule against what happened.
I still don't know that it's impossible that they could have punished them, just that that's the position that the district is taking. Certainly, anytime you move to discipline a teacher or fire a teacher, it's going to be a fight, most likely. And it sounds like that's just a fight that they weren't willing to take on.
Well, Kayla Jimenez has done a great job investigating some of these things and following up. Again, this is a series of investigative work and pieces we've been doing for the last, 3 years now. And it continues to boggle the mind, all the things we're finding out, all the records we pull up, and the amount of records that she and others have had to go through and how troubling they are is certainly something that's going to stick with them. All right, other news this week. So the glorious palace that it is, right there in the Midway District, standing like a beacon to the city's sports excellence, is the...
As famously depicted in Almost Famous.
Right. It's this true icon of San Diego, the sports arena, the Pachanga Arena. So that is a venue that is...
Twice hosts to the Grateful Dead.
The site of a vibrant weekend market.
Yes.
It's a real special place in San Diego's soul. That whole land and the arena itself is owned by the city of San Diego. The hockey team, the Gulls, play there. The lacrosse team, what's it called again?
Seals, baby.
And the indoor soccer league plays there. And then they have, I watched Neil Diamond there.
Yeah, Elton John was there this year.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Justin Timberlake last year, right? Recently,
this year.
Was it this year? Okay,
Yeah.
So there you go.
So it's owned by the city. It is, all those events are managed by the company that manages it and has the lease for it right now. So the city says, you're in charge. You collect the revenue from that. You pay us rent, right?
Yes.
Now that company would want to keep doing that, but the owners of the hockey team have a different idea.
Yeah, they would like to take over. They want to bid for the right to do that job instead.
So is it because they don't like how it's going?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. Or at least they want...
They think they could do it
better. They can do it better, and there's money to be made doing it, right?
Right, and so...
But, yeah, I think it's fair to say that if they thought that all of their needs were being taken care of, there would be no need to go through any of this, right?
So the city said, fine, we'll open it up to bids. But now a weird legal battle has blown up. The new group that wants to take over this job, the owners of the Gulls, they want access to some financial documents about how it runs from the previous tenants or the management company that exists right now, AEG, big group,
Yes.
big company.
Both the Sam Wellies that own the Gulls are also very, very wealthy people.
And so AEG says, no, you can't have those documents, but those are public documents. So what's going on?
Yeah, it's a good reminder that the Public Records Act does not belong to journalists, despite frequently misstated popular opinion. The Gulls ownership group submitted a Public Records Act request to the city shortly after the city opened up an open bidding process for the right to operate this facility. And they said, one of the things we'd like is these audited financial statements that AEG must submit as part of their lease. Every year they need to put forward their audited financial statements. In response to that, the city looked into it and said, yeah, these are public records. We have determined that there are no exemptions that apply, and we're going to provide this not just to you, San Diego Gulls ownership group, but to anybody who wants to look at them. And the AEG ownership group got involved and said, no, those are trade secrets. Those are that's confidential information. It involves information that has nothing to do with city business and therefore should not be public. And we would be harmed significantly if you put them forward. Now, the Gulls' argument is basically, we can't compete with them for a bid if we don't know these basic figures about how much they're bringing in, how many events they have, their relationships. And there's sort of a kind of tacit agreement that that's the case, but AEG basically just says it would be too much of an advantage if you could look at them. You'd be able to tailor your bid to trump ours, essentially.
So over all of this is the discussion about the whole area too, right? The owner of the lacrosse team, what's it called again?
Seals, baby.
Okay.
But not baby seals, which would be a dope mascot, to be honest.
There's actually a comma in the name. It's the San Diego Seals, baby.
Oh, cool. The owner is Joe Tsai, famous worldwide billionaire. He owns part of the Brooklyn Nets basketball team, and he's been rumored for many months, years, to be thinking about a new arena somewhere in San Diego. And this whole land, again, is owned by the city of San Diego, and they're marching clearly toward some sort of reuse of the whole area, allowing homes, maybe a new arena. If they want to build a new arena, though, they'd have to get a new vote of the people that would allow them to break that.
If they wanted to build it there.
If they wanted to build it there.
They could build it elsewhere without a vote.
Do a kind of flip. And so is that entering into this discussion?
I think it's certainly part of the conversation in that everybody here seems to want something better. The lobbyists that the Gulls ownership group has retained, their stated purpose is to either improve the existing arena or build a better one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the city actually arranged for all of its leases. It's not just that land. It's also like where Phil's Barbecue is, where Dixieland Lumber is. Many of those leases are scheduled to be running out over the next couple of years, and the city wants to package all of them together.
The city kind of exercised some foresight. I think we actually gave them credit on the show like a year ago, which is rare for us. But they, at the same time, they kind of looked forward and said, all right, a lot of these leases are coming up to end. Let's do that. Let's allow them to expire. At the same time, let's update the land use policies in that area that will accommodate much more development in the area. And so once those leases are expired, we could potentially redevelop the entire thing.
In other news, last week, we learned that Corey Briggs, the attorney who's well known in Southern California for suing government agencies and developers, dropped his bid for mayor. It's not clear when it ever really started. But the UT remember that random story last week about how awkward it would be for him to sue the mayor and also be suing the city of San Diego? Well, they better grab their pearls, because last week, Briggs began telling people he's running for the city attorney job instead. Tuesday, he filed to run. San Diego City Attorney Mara Elliott had not yet drawn an opponent for re-election. Now she's got one. Certainly interesting because, he does sue the city. What do we think about this? Is he going to make a run for it? Is he going to make a change? Now, remember, all races have to go to November runoffs. So no matter how well Mara Elliott, the incumbent, does in the primary, she'll have to carry this out through, the next 16 months or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. He announced he was running for city attorney, he announced he was running for mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked him if he was running for mayor because if you remember his announcement that he was running for mayor, didn't ever say, I am running for mayor.
It said something like, I'm throwing my hat in, or I could throw my hat in.
It was always 1 degree away from saying the words, I am running for mayor.
Uh-huh.
And then when I asked him, he said something again that did not include the words, I am running for mayor. And then when we published a story pointing out that he was going out of his way to say, not to say I am running for mayor, he quote tweeted that story and said, I'm sorry if I was unclear. And then again intimated that he was running for mayor, but never said I am running for mayor. And then it is also the case that he never filed papers to run for mayor and has since declared that he is not running for mayor. And then after telling people that he was running for city attorney, he did file papers right away that he's actually running for city attorney. So I don't know what all that mayor stuff was, but it's an open question to me whether he was ever running for mayor, given everything I just said.
On a spectrum of definitely running for city attorney versus not running for city attorney.
He filed the paperwork, so that's clear as day. I don't know why he never did it for mayor if he was running.
Right.
But I also don't understand why he was unwilling to just say, I'm running for mayor.
If one person in the city of San Diego is going to run against Mara Elliott, is this the worst person for her to run against or the best person for her to run against? If you're interested in her being reelected, I'm not saying I am. I'm just saying for her, in her perspective.
I think best because there's, like a certain kind of person who knows who Corey Briggs is, right? Somebody who's very tuned in to city politics. And I think of those people, a lot of them have a bad reaction to him. And then the other group of people is people who never heard of him and therefore, the same situation we saw in 2016, they see somebody on the ballot with the word city attorney next to them. They're probably going to go with that.
Right.
So we've got like a real crossfire scenario here. I disagree.
Okay.
I think this is the worst person that could run against her. So in 2016, it was clear watching that race, it is very difficult to get anybody juiced about a city attorney race. People just, they don't know what the job is. It's unclear to them. And the people who run typically spend their time kind of trying to explain what it is. And I got news for you. When you do that, it sounds very boring. You start explaining that like you're the legal counsel for the city, but also you can, you prosecute misdemeanors and you give legal advice and blah, blah, blah. You defend the city in laws, right? It's a snooze. Corey Briggs will not be a snooze. Corey Briggs would be somebody who, if nothing else, can inject actual topics that people might care about and might react to into a race that would otherwise just be people explaining how they would go about providing legal counsel to the city council in closed session.
There is a counterpoint to your point that nobody understands the race and engages in that, and that's 2008 when Mike Aguirre lost. He was the incumbent, but that's literally because he had made as much possible controversy for himself as he could have. There's no way he could have been more of a lightning rod than he was. And I'm not sure Mara Elliott's in the same boat, although she's definitely had a couple of stumbles and issues come up. All right, coming up on the other side of the break, an interview with Maya Rosas. She's the head of the YIMBY Democrats of San Diego. We have a lot to talk to her about, especially the demise or the whatever happened to SB 50. Stay tuned for that.
Justin Schiffer. My favorite part is the podcast.
Oh, really? What do you like most about the podcast?
I like the relationship between the hosts, or among the hosts. I think they have a really good banter and obviously work well together and have interesting conversations.
How long have you been... Hey, this is Nate John from Voice. If you like the podcast too, and if you're into what we're doing here, and you like catching up on the news with Scott and Sarah and Andy, now is the time to support it. Putting the show together every week is a lot of work, but it's something we all love doing here, and we're committed to it. So if you're committed to the show, too, and if you want to make sure we can keep going with it, maybe do more live shows, please consider donating. voiceofsandiego.org. And thanks.
Okay, we are back. We talked about this a bit last week, but it's only gotten more interesting over the last few days. Sacramento watchers were stunned when without a vote, one of the most controversial bills in the legislature died last week. The bill, SB 50, would have forced cities to allow 4 to 5 story apartment buildings within a half mile of transit stops and employment centers. In various statements, State Senate President Tony Atkins, who's in charge of the Senate, something's going to happen. If something's going to happen in the Senate, she's the one who would have some influence on it. She's from San Diego. She said the bill is not dead, and even if it were dead, it wasn't her call to kill it. And even so, she didn't like it much.
Took a while to get that last part out, but like for her to.
Yeah.
But it is important to note that
she's
has
finally
now said
acknowledged
that.
it was a whole op-ed, but it was one line in the whole op-ed where she's like, this wasn't so good.
Yeah.
I feel like I read it a little differently than you guys read it, which was I sort of read it as very classic Tony Atkins in like just trying to appease everybody and not piss anyone off too badly, because, you know, like even the headline, which I'm sure she didn't write, but like said the housing crisis is urgent, but we need to take our time to craft a solution. And Scott Wiener is so great, and I agree with this bill in theory, but also I don't agree with it. So I just read it as like I'm throwing everything out there to give something to everybody what they want to hear.
No, I agree with all that. There was that one line, though, where she said the bill had a big flaw because it was a one-size-fits-all and, you know, sort of solution, and that communities made the case to her that that was inappropriate. And so I agree with everything you said, but that is the one thing. And she acts like that's kind of a small thing that we could maybe adjust. And yet that's the whole point of the bill, really.
It's also not really true, because they made this big concession before it got to this point to exempt cities of a certain size.
Right, that is actually true. So our pal at the LA Times, Liam Dillon, did some great reporting. He had a great point this week. He's like, this is a big deal. This went down. This was a bill that was endorsed not only by the LA Times but the New York Times. Like that's how much attention it got nationally. He said that, you know, last year a lot of people who were concerned about gentrification and other social justice concerns about it were able to sort of really halt it. But this year it was the suburbs that really got activated. He talked to a woman, Susan Kirsch. She's an activist from Mill Valley, head of Livable California. She was unironically vacationing in Greece when this happened. She helped rally legislators to oppose it. She said she believes state officials have demonized suburban homeowners like her, blaming them for the housing problems. And the true culprits, she said, are technology companies that rapidly grew but did not invest enough in affordable housing to offset the effects of the influx of workers. This is really an interesting point, I think, where, you know, the concept of supply is acknowledged.
Yeah, no, she's saying is it's not that we have too few houses, it's that we have too many jobs.
Right.
That's a point I've seen lots of people in the Bay Area make.
But she
it's a prevalent idea.
She said we have too many jobs, but she hints at the supply because she says they should have been creating houses, but she never says where they should have gone then.
Right.
So Maya Rosas is the founding president of the YIMBY Democrats of San Diego County. She's been following this closely. This week, she wrote an open letter to Senator Tony Atkins on our site. You can find it at voicessandiego.org. That letter urged Atkins to bring SB 50 to the floor so that we could see a vote. Maya joins us. Welcome, Maya.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, what did you think? Do you you didn't hammer or really blast Tony Atkins, but you think she made a wrong choice, or how do you interpret it?
Well, I'm definitely really disappointed in how SB 50 went down. In theory, it's in a coma. It's going to come back, but for all intents and purposes, it should have gone to a floor vote this month.
Is that what you decided the best metaphor for it is, that it's in a coma right now?
That's what I've been using lately.
Because it's not dead. We can't say it's dead.
Why? Because it was a 2-year bill, right?
Right.
Okay.
So on ice.
Coma.
Mm-hmm.
Coma.
Hiatus.
Shelf.
There's a moratorium.
All right.
Good. Okay, we've got that up.
The point being, it might come back. Now, what do you say to people who do bring up, like, it is a one-size-fit-all solution, and that, you know, Solana Beach is different than La Mesa? What are we doing, you know?
Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all bill. I mean, I think Sarah said it right. It's a many sizes fit many different communities. And the truth of the matter is that if you're a community that is within whatever the provisions were near high frequency bus or rail, that that is the right place to be building houses. And so whether you're in downtown San Diego, someplace in the Bay Area, any place in between, if you fit those qualifications where you're near transit, where you have access to good jobs, good schools, then yeah, I think that this should apply.
There was also, and this I believe was part of the change from the precursor bill from last year, they added this high employment zone, essentially, that you'd be able to have the same requirements for new home building in areas where there were a lot of jobs. And correct me if I'm wrong, the way I read this is basically, if you had just made it on transit, then you would essentially be introducing this incentive to oppose new transit investments, even more so than people already do. And so you might just move the front line from a fight against housing to a fight against transit, and that's how neighborhoods would keep development out of their areas. And that this jobs provision was a way of kind of combating that and saying, if you're an area where a lot of people work, even if transit isn't there yet, you need to be able to provide housing there.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think another important aspect to it is that having more houses near jobs, which are usually, the high paying jobs at least are near higher income neighborhoods, this goes towards desegregating our communities. So it also helps with combating the argument that SB 50 or the previous version, SB 27, was going to create more gentrification and displacement. But if you can build this type of housing near jobs and in communities that previously wouldn't accept this type of multifamily housing, 4 or 5 stories, we're not talking about high rises, but we need to be getting that type of housing in those neighborhoods. And this SB 50 would have done that. And I also think that that's part of what led to the suburban communities being able to kill it and mounting this type of attack against it.
So the way that this bill died, it went to the Appropriations Committee because of a small amount of money it would cost the state to sort of implement. The leader of that committee, Senator Portantino, from the Orange County area, right?
No, La Cañada, Front Ridge. I think it's north of LA.
Oh, okay. That whole area is very confusing to me. Sorry. He was the leader of this Appropriations Committee, and he just didn't let it go. It wasn't that there was a vote of the committee or whatever. And the issue that came up with they had seen this opposition from suburbs before in the previous committee, and they had kind of tried to deal with it by making a pretty significant compromise, which was that small counties with small population would not be affected by it, and also cities with people with fewer than 50,000 people would not be affected by it. So we had a weird situation where La Jolla might be under its jurisdiction, but Solana Beach would not, because La Jolla was part of a large city and Solana Beach is a smaller city. Were you okay with some of those changes, or did it start to get to a place where you were uncomfortable with them?
We were definitely not anywhere near close to me being uncomfortable with what was in the proposal. Yeah, it was definitely getting a little bit messy, a little bit hard to follow, and possibly there could have been even more negotiations leading to it being even more complicated. But it was getting to the root of the problem. It was commensurate to the size of the housing crisis that we're at right now. And those ongoing negotiations, they can't continue until this bill comes forward and, hopefully in the next week, this month. But if not, it'll have to be next year.
I think one of the interesting parts about the bill, though, was it was a statewide thing. And so when you start to carve communities out like that, it feels like it may seem like a small compromise, but it's like a foot in the door to accepting that worldview that there are different communities that shouldn't have to take this kind of housing in. And so once you make that compromise, it's almost like you hurt more support than you get. Does that make sense? Is that a fair read from you guys' take?
Sure, it is. And, the issue with saying that this bill was too much when Senator Atkins put it into its coma, or that it's a
medically induced.
Medically
sure.
induced, very good. The
problem with saying that it's a one size fits all is that, that to me, that implies that you want to be reducing even further its impacts. Because if you believe that the housing crisis is an emergency, like I do, and like Senator Atkins says she does, then the solutions need to actually be solving the problem and facing it head on. And so, yeah, the more that you dilute it, the less it's actually solving the problem.
My contention with what Scott just said is actually ever so slightly different, which is that it's not so much that it's a foot in the door towards accepting that there are different neighborhoods that maybe could deal with it differently. It's that it's a concession that housing is a negative consequence to be dealt with, which has kind of been the basis of housing regulation across the state. And whether it's CEQA or local zoning initiatives, it's always, well, what are you going to do to deal with this new housing? And I sort of see the notion of 827 and SB 50 to be a departure from that at all, and saying housing is good and we should make it easier to build, not housing is a menace to be dealt with after we are forced to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fair enough. More housing is one absolutely needed. We're in a terrible crisis. We're not building nearly enough of affordable housing at the very low income levels, as well as market rate housing, and the demand is only going to grow and grow and grow. But yeah, it's important. We need more housing in the right places, again, near transit, which also usually means near amenities, in livable communities where you can, live, work, play, all that fun stuff. And it should be a benefit. When people talk about community character, they're talking about, I guess, the single story type of neighborhood that they live in. But, we need to be shifting that conversation to talk about community character being your neighbors themselves, the good people who live next door to you, who either are, in the high income jobs, doctors or whatnot, or in the service industry, and that is your community character, is the people in the neighborhood.
Going back to the concessions that you were talking about, kind of the thing I don't necessarily understand about Toni Atkins' position that I wish she had added more clarity to in her op-ed is like, she said she agrees with the idea of the bill, and the idea is that, local communities sometimes are so resistant to growth that we need to override that. And so if you agree with that and you concede that that's a problem that needs to be dealt with, then if you simultaneously let a lot of these local opponents say, well, we're not satisfied with it enough yet, is there ever going to be a point where a bill about overriding local control is going to satisfy locals?
Yeah, let me pivot off of that point. When it's the same, if it feels like she's heading toward a solution, and if you read between the lines, something that would say to these areas, you have to hit these goals, but maybe you can do it in your own way, which is a sort of another step in what they've already done with some of their housing goals and stuff like that. And what is the problem with that in your interpretation of? I feel like that's where she's heading, is we didn't give them enough control. That's precisely what the one-size-fits-all complaint would lead to, is well, you can come up with your own, creative solution to this. But what's the problem with letting local communities do that?
Well, so what are they going to do with this local control? Are they, their options are what? To allow for 4 or 5 stories if it was SB 50's way. And the alternative is that they'd probably choose to make it fewer units and shorter buildings, right? What are their alternatives to make this work for them? Maybe I'm just not imaginative enough to figure it out. But I think what they are really trying to get at is that they don't want to build this housing. And we're not going to fix it by giving them the option to figure out how to do it. I mean, that's what we have now, and they're not doing it.
Yeah, it almost certainly feels like a red herring where they're like, well, we might come up with a tower here, you never know, and then, maybe not have something over here. But no, they want to stop this. They maybe want to allow it in some parts, but not to the extent that it was prescribed.
Right. And I'm not saying that SB 50 is or was perfect how it is. I'm fine with it being further amended as long as it doesn't have serious impacts on how much housing can be built out of it. But what's really disappointing about it being delayed is that, having it come back in January, in theory, that seems fine. But do you really think that it's going to be easier to pass this bill in an election year, in a presidential election year? Everyone's going to be paying attention. It's not going to be any easier to pass or to make negotiations or compromise.
Yeah, so you mentioned maybe you're not imaginative enough to think about the fixes, but I guess that's where I'm wondering too. It seems like we're at the basic disagreement point around which there's no more concessions that are going to persuade anybody. I mean, if you think back to what 827 was, especially on the day it was released, before some of the changes that went through, which were, some of the changes that Senator Wiener made around that were about building in sort of tenant protections for people who may be displaced by new housing, that they would be guaranteed a position in the new housing that might be built. And then 50 came out, and 50 had much lower building heights that it would mandate, much lower densities. It had a little bit more fine-tuned about which types of transit were sufficient to trigger these sorts of upzonings. And I guess I just don't know where else there is to go. I mean, if this isn't enough to get it through, what is going to be different next year?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, generally, when I think about it locally, people can come against a high-rise building, say in Bankers Hill. There was one recently that got approved by City Council, 20-plus stories. Well, instead here, the solution was 4 or 5-story buildings, but across a larger area. So if you want to lower that even more, then I think the idea of allowing fourplexes, which I didn't mention in my letter, but was another provision, which allowed fourplexes in any single-family zoned lot, if it followed some certain rules. Well, then I think we need to up that, because we just need to be getting to building the number of housing units we need.
I think the last place I saw you was at a debate I managed in Tierra Santa area, La Mesa area, between Ginger Hitzke, a developer of affordable housing, and Corey Briggs. Corey Briggs, who's now a city attorney candidate, who's one of your biggest critics. I think he says he calls you guys shills for developers, and he's very critical of the whole bill. And now he's part of the coalition to do a state constitutional amendment that would prohibit this legislature from doing these kind of laws and make sure that zoning laws were something only local areas could do. And I remember you stood up, and I was actually surprised at how well his rhetoric was received by that all Democratic group. And what do you feel like the culture is right now, the state of politics around these issues is right now? Because it does feel like it's a pretty hostile crowd, even among progressives.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening with SB 50 is basically the reason why I started the YIMBY Democrats of San Diego County, because I believe strongly that having enough homes for people to live in places that are convenient for them, that's a very progressive value. And apparently that's something that's hard to learn for some. So yeah, it's a reoccurring, dynamic. And I'm actively working within the Democratic Party to shape that because it's just unacceptable. And it's a future that I don't want the Democratic Party to be a part of, is where they think that being pro-immigration is good, but anti-housing. So, we'll accept refugees and immigrants, but we will not accept people into our neighborhood who can't put down $1 million for a home.
Yeah, the country may be not full, but our neighborhoods are.
Absolutely. And that's just unacceptable.
What about, so one thing that is not really at issue on the left is support for affordable housing, right? That is like a universally accepted winning issue.
In concept.
Yeah, in concept. Sure. Yeah, that's a good caveat, that sometimes when it's actually proposed, that support might fall apart. But a winning rhetorical move is to say the solution is not upzoning for market rate, it's providing more financial support to build more housing that's going to be reserved for low-income people. How do you respond to those two ideas being pitted against each other?
Well, first of all, it's not either or. In San Diego and across the state, we have our density bonus program. And so the truth of the matter is that there's just not enough money out there, even with the Housing Federation's proposed bill, which would build 7,500 units. There's just not enough money out there to build enough affordable housing for the need, which is really unfortunate, but that is the truth. And so we are tens of thousands of units behind in building lower income housing. And so one way of getting there is by putting to use our density bonus program. So that means we have to allow market rate building to be built if it incorporates affordable housing on site. And then you get a density bonus, which means you get to build extra units. And so to me, that's a win-win because we do still need to be building market rate homes. And we're just not going to build the affordable homes we need without market rate.
One other state bill that we've been watching is this bill, AB 1731, that would really sharply limit vacation rentals in San Diego. And over the years, as we've continually not solved the vacation rental problem, it's been interesting to watch the rhetoric from people who oppose rentals shift to being almost completely well, rentals wipe out the housing stock and we're in a housing crisis. Obviously, we need housing. Do you think that there's a lot of overlap between people who want to ban vacation rentals but also want to keep housing out of their neighborhood? I'm guessing that these people who say we're in a housing crisis, we can't afford to have all these vacation rentals, are probably the same people who are happy to see SB 50 go down. Do you think that's fair?
I think that that's fair. You know, in all my times going to public hearings, supporting new developments, going to talks about housing and how to fix this crisis, supporting SB 50. I've never run into someone saying that I'm pro homes and I'm anti-vacation and I'm an advocate for both.
Rosas, she's a founder of the YIMBY Democrats, not the Democrats themselves. She founded that club. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. Again, if you like listening to us each week and if you value what we're doing here, please consider making a donation. Please just do it. We are really proud of our membership program. And if you value what we do, we value all of you. So you can be part of Voice and give at voiceofsandiego.org. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief at Voice. Andy Keats is the Assistant Editor. Sarah Libby is the extraordinary Managing Editor. This show is produced by Nate John, Adriana Heldes, and Megan Wood. Talk to you next week.